Okay, so now we've done our first round of activity, and it's a good idea to do a second and even a third round in order to get the muscle, as it's tiring, to become very fatigued. And that's one of the things, one of our goals is to fatigue the muscle, but to fatigue it safely. We're going to be working the lat muscles again here in the back of the chest, and we're going to continue to use our lat row activity. Although often in a workout we would use an activity where we would increase the weight. Right now, because we may have a limitation, it's perfectly fine to use the same weight. If you want to feel more engagement of the muscle, then we can go slower or hold the action at certain points. So pausing a little bit can make us work just a little bit harder. Now we're going to be using the kneeling method for the lat once more. So hand and knee on the outer leg there, other leg braced. We reach down, and we're going to be pulling upward, but also bending the elbow and moving toward the spine. A little bit of an inward pull, and then coming back down. Again, we want to shoot for about 10. And what do I mean about pausing? Come up a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. So this very graduated way of coming up and prolonging the amount of action that we're going into is a great way, and even prolonging as we're lowering it, great way to work a little bit of extra. Let yourself stretch. The longer a muscle is as it begins the contraction, the more powerful the contraction. You can also just do a very smooth but extremely slow activity, and that is definitely going to exhaust the muscle. Remember, it's not the weight that we're lifting, it's the exhaustion of the muscle that we're after. Breathing deeply. You're going to feel probably in your second round that your body's fully warmed up, and you're probably going to have your best experience of the actions now. The whole idea is that we want to feel the area that we're trying to target become engaged. Use that breath, the exhale. One more. And that's good. Very nice. All right, so lats worked, and now we're ready to go to our second exercise. So it's time for the hamstrings, our second round of it. Now in round one, we used the good morning action, feet spread wide, this behind us, pushing the hips backward and coming forward, until we felt the hamstrings in a stretch. We didn't lift the back up, we pushed the hips underneath us to engage the hamstring. And you could do another round with those good mornings. But there's another activity for the hamstring, and it works on the bend of the knee. And for this one, either a rolled mat, or if you don't have a mat, a nice thick roll of towel. You need something that's compressible, that's not going to slide around the back of your leg. We're going to come face down, and we're going to place this mat in the back of the knee region. Mat's rather nice because once you get it in place, it's going to stay there. Now, part of this action is to push the pelvis down. I'm going to keep my spine long. You can be all the way down, you can have your head rested, or you can stay upright, what's comfortable for you. But push the front of the pelvis down, point your toes, and bend your knees. You're going to be finding that you've got a hold of that mat, and as you bend and push that pelvis down, you're going to feel a strong engagement of the hamstrings. Now, a common thing that happens is, if you're not used to this activity, is that you will feel a super engagement, also known as a spasm in the hamstring. If that's the case, then don't use the mat at all. Just work on your ability. Lower your body, work to bend the knees. It's more advanced to point the toe, and watch out for the tendency as you bend the knees for your pelvis to lift up. We want to keep the pelvis pressed down so there's a pre-engagement of our glutes as we're creating this action. So with or without the roll behind the knees, or using the stick for good mornings, keep low, push the pelvis down, pull the belly, vacuum it off the floor, and squeeze. Let's do 10 of these. The more you point the toe, the more you're going to engage the hamstring. But again, it might be super engaged, so just to play it in the way that works the best for you. Probably going to feel it in the glutes too. Push the pelvis down, pull the belly in. Good. Now, how do you know if your hamstrings are strong enough? Well, it's a balance between the hamstring and the quadricep. One way to tell if you've got enough action going on so there's a good balance between the back and front of the leg is a flexibility and strength test. And what you do is you take your fist and you place it on the seat muscle, and then you bend and you see, can you touch your heel to that fist? You check one side and you check the other side. If that heel is not able to touch that fist, chances are your hamstrings are not strong enough and your quad, the front of your thigh muscles, are not long enough. All right, good work. And now we'll move into our next exercise. For our next action, we're back into the tricep area, the back of the arm. And for our first round, we did the tricep kickbacks. We used about a 4-pound weight. But again, remember, it's not the weight that works for me, it's the weight that works for you. So higher or lower for you. And the method that we used was to kneel on one side and to take the elbow up to the height of the chest, parallel from shoulder to the elbow, parallel to the floor. And then we created the action of a kickback. And a kickback is a very strong action for the tricep area. And so that's a good one to work. But there are other things that we can do. Now, again, the idea here is that we may not have a lot of equipment, but you know, it's possible that you do have some things around the house that can be used. Now, if indeed you have some blocks around, blocks are really good. You might have different size blocks. If you don't have blocks, perhaps you have a couple of books, and if they're books that you were going to toss out anyway, you could wrap them with duct tape perhaps, and that would work. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a bit of a dip. Now, the thing about a dip is that we could say, well, we could use a chair, but I find that sometimes chairs are just not quite appropriate for having our full body weight. They might slide a little bit. So if you put a chair against the wall, you might be able to use that for a dip. But also we could use a dip using a couple of blocks available to us. So I'm going to put this down like so and sit, and I'm going to bring my hands here so that the heel of my palm is on this block. I'm going to keep my knees bent. Now the idea is that I want my elbows to go from a bent position to a straight position. So if I start off with my arms already straight, that's not going to help me very much. So one of the ways I do this, instead of sitting straight upward, is I move my hips a little bit forward and I put more of a bend, so I'm leaning backward into that block and then pushing to straighten the arms. Now that's a fairly simple action, and the resistance is my body weight, and I can push to resist my body going forward. But I can also use my body weight once I've come forward to lift my hips up. And that's going to get more action, especially in the longer head of that tricep muscle, so it's straighten and lift. That works great. But another one would be that we used the straightening and the lift at the same time. So the elbows are bent, we lift, and then we straighten, and we come back down. And so we lift and straighten. You're going to feel a lot of activity on that. So 3 methods. Here again, it's back and forward. You could use them all like that, remembering that if you just pushed with your legs, you'd have more resistance. You could go back, come forward, and then lift, feeling the end of that action. A nice, strong activity. And then you could use the lift. So you're lifting and then straightening like so. And that's a very strong action for the arms. So 10 of that activity, or one side the kickback, the other side the kickback. And we've got the tricep muscle nicely worked out. And then we're ready for our next exercise. For our next exercise, it's time to work the core again. And for our first round, we were face down, and we're going to be face down again, but we might add on a little bit of intensity to the action. So we'll come face down, and once again, we're going to place our arms right underneath the shoulder. So grab hold, make sure you've got that shoulder distance wide so you don't create any strain. Forearms like train tracks sticking forward. We're going to broaden the back of the chest, pull the shoulders toward the hips. Now for round one, we stretch as we pull forward. We push the knees down. We crunch by bringing the ribs toward the navel. And that's really good. At this time, if you want, you can go up a little bit higher, but you'll not lift up your hips very high above the line of the shoulder. So you pull forward, and then you stay on those knees pushing down. You come up, and you're holding, and you've got a nice flattened back region, and come back down. Now you're going to see a little bit of rounding of my back. It's because I'm bringing the ribs toward the navel to get a full action. So it's either going to be the crunch without much lift, or pulling forward, shoulders toward hips, broad between shoulder blades, and the crunch, and you lift and you hold for just a little bit longer, and then come back down, and let's do some more of those. So we broaden shoulders down and crunch. So I tuck the head down so the neck is not straining. Inhaling and then exhale. We're going to do two more. One more. Very good. So core structure specifically, more rectus abdominis than anything else. That's great. And now we'll move into the next exercise. Now our next exercise is again the squat. Squat is a foundation building type of exercise. We don't have to do anything to intensify it or change up what's happening because it's going to be a total leg workout, especially as you keep the weight back at the heels. We use the chair as a sort of a platform to touch. This time, if you want, you can still use the chair, put it behind you, making sure that you've got an aim, but we can also change the angle because we were reaching arms forward a bit, creating a change. If we take this rod that we were using for the good mornings and just place it in the back of the body like so, it's going to reinforce the alignment of the back, and we're going to find that we'll notice more if we're bending forward as we come down into the squat. So let's spread our feet out a little wider than hip distance. Let's push the weight back onto those heels, engage the core, pulling in the belly, and chin forward. We're going to come down. Remember, your hips and your shoulders come down, and then you push back up again. Try and drive through the heels. So weight back on the heels. Don't let the body tip forward. Don't let the chest come down lower than the hips. So down and up. You don't have to go very low. If your squat isn't very deep at all, that's a good beginning action. And we're getting no assistance whatsoever from the arms. Going to do two more. One more. Good. All right, nice action. And now we're ready for that next exercise. Now in our first round, we were working the deltoid, and we were specific to the front part called the anterior deltoid. And there are three pieces of muscles that are known as a deltoid. They're sort of like this sleeve of my shirt. There's a front piece, a middle, and then a posterior region. And we're going to get this middle region. And before we were using perhaps a fairly strong weight doing an upright row, and you could certainly do more upright rows if that's what you wanted to do and build just that anterior piece. But it's nice to have them all balanced out. Now, medial deltoid tends to not be something we work very much. And so I'm going to choose these little 1 pound weights. I'm going to find that that's going to be a bit of a challenge for the body. You could use any size weight that you wanted, but we are going to be taking the arms out to the side. So we're going to stand in a nice firm action, pulling that core, drop the shoulder blades down a little bit. Now don't think of lifting the arms up. Think of reaching the arms slowly outward. And that's the medial deltoid. They end at about a 60-degree lift, not to the full 90, and then we come back down again. Now the problem is if we lift all the way up, then we're going to get the action here in the upper trap, and that's not our target right now. Our target is the deltoid. So again, engage the core, drop the shoulders down, reach the arms slowly outward, and the slower you go, the more this little weight that you might be using is going to feel very strong. I see a lot of people creating this action, and they're lifting up with speed, and they're missing out on a lot of muscle fiber. There you go. Now you can continue like that, but you can also do sort of a little seesaw effect. You can have one up and then the other coming up. There's a tendency to take the arm up pretty high when you're doing this, so be cautious of the lift. Try not to take it anywhere above the 90-degree line, and if you prefer both at the same time, just reaching outward, that's probably going to be a nice strong action for that medial deltoid. And one more. Good. All right, there's the medial deltoid. And we're going to start again with new exercise for our third round.